Huh? Yeah. Yeah. Can you hear me now? Good morning. Good to see everyone this morning. If you would turn to number 459. Precious Book Divine. 459. How precious is the book divine, by inspiration given, bright as a lamp its precepts shine, to guide my soul to heaven. Holy book divine, bring me safely home. It sweetly cheers my drooping heart in this dark vale of tears. Light to my life it still imparts, and quells my rising fears. Holy book divine, precious treasure mine, lamp to my feet and through all the tedious night of life shall guide my way, till I behold a clearer light of an eternal day. Holy book divine, precious treasure mine, lamp to my feet and a light to my way, to guide me safely home. Dennis, would you lead us in prayer?
Holy Father, we come to God before your presence, thanking you for the privilege of prayer, thanking you for this first day of the week. We pray, Heavenly Father, you bless us now as we enter the study of a portion of your word. Help us to have open minds to your truths, help us with our memories that we might be able to recall the things we study, and use them day by day as we prepare. We pray that you with Mike as he directs our thoughts. Forgive us, we pray, our sins. In Jesus' name.
Amen. Romans chapter 1. I think this will be the last one on chapter 1. We'll go into chapter 2 next week. God used a system that was meant to prepare and lead all mankind to Christ. Galatians chapter 3, verse 24 to 26. The perfect system of religion that would once and for all save man from his sins. Romans chapter 1, verse 16. And this is why Paul points out to these brethren in Rome that's this gospel system that was and remains God's power to save. He says to the Jews first, then to the Gentiles. The Jews had been God's chosen people for centuries, so why should they not receive the first opportunity to hear this saving message? God had repeatedly shown all people of the earth, both sides. He taught the patriarchs before the law came. He taught it through men to men through the flood, to the descendants of Noah. And it was shown through Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, David, Solomon, and Jonah. Century after century, the Gentile world could witness God's blessings upon the Jews when they obeyed God's will, as well as the punishment upon the Jews when they disobeyed God, and the punishment of Gentiles for their evil as well. Acts chapter 14, verse 16 to 17, Luke says, who in the generations gone by allowed all the nations to walk in their own ways. And yet he left not himself without witness, in that he did good, gave you from heaven rains and fruitful seasons, filling your hearts with food and gladness. So Paul continues here in verse 24 to 32 to demonstrate the wickedness to which men will go, how far they're willing to go. when they reject God's ways, when they draw close, when they choose to direct their own steps, find out that it's not good for society. Jeremiah chapter 10 and verse 23. So in verse 24 of Romans 1, Paul continues, "Wherefore God gave them up in the lusts of their hearts unto uncleanness, that their bodies should be dishonored among themselves, for that they exchanged the truth of God for a lie, worshipped and served the creature rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. For this cause God gave them up unto vile passions, for their women changed the natural use into that which is against nature. Likewise also the men, leaving the natural use of the woman, burned in their lust one toward another, men with men working unseemliness, receiving in themselves that recompense of their error which was due. Even as they refused to have God in their knowledge, God gave them up unto a reprobate mind, to do those things which are not fitting, being filled with all unrighteousness, wickedness, covetousness, maliciousness, full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, malignity, whisperers, backbiters, hateful to God, insolent, haughty, boastful, inventors of evil things, disobedient to parents, without understanding, covenant breakers, without natural affection, unmerciful, who knowing the ordinance of God, that they that practice such things are worthy of death, not only do the same, but also consent with them that practice them." Do we see any of that today? Yeah, constantly. God so loved the world that he created, that he gave his only begotten Son. John 3:16. God does not wish for anyone to perish, but desires that everyone repent and turn to his ways. 2 Peter 3 verse 9. Despite God revealing his existence and his will, the Gentiles turned against him. Paul says God gave them up to their own devices, to their own passions, to their own ways. And this is what many Americans want today. Well, really, men and women all over the world. Abandoning the ways of God. Desiring instead to have absolute freedom to do as they please. No responsibilities whatsoever. And they assume falsely that the Constitution was designed to do just that. It was to a point to allow freedom, as the founders designed a system of government that's just shy of allowing chaos. Plenty of freedom, yet some law to prevent men from destroying themselves and their country. Laws and rules are a must. And because we do not have it within ourselves to prevent ourselves from going so far or too far, again, Jeremiah 10 verse 23, 1 Peter 1:9 says that law is made for the lawless, for the unruly, for the ungodly. Just as the law was given because of transgression. The founders understood this concept, which is why they said that our constitutional republic can only stand as long as men sought God and his ways. When left to themselves, men would choose money, power, so on, all to the expense of their fellow man, which again worship idols. They will worship wealth, power, Mother Earth, the environment, animals, and so on. All over God. They'll turn against God. So Paul says God left the Gentiles to themselves. What does he mean? How did God leave the Gentiles to themselves?
In a way, they had been given instructions as to how to please God, but they weren't, didn't change their mind, quit forcing anything on them, they still had freedom of choice, so they could choose them wrong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, God doesn't force anybody to obey him. He's not a tyrant. He says, okay, here's the way that everyone should live, and here's the choice that you can make not to do that. It's up to you. I prefer that you live this way, but if you choose to live that way, that's your choice. I'll grant you the consequences of that.
I think, I was just thinking that you were saying that, and reading this, that you got those who are just going to seem like they're going to be wicked, immoral, everything like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then those who, another camp who thinks that I can do some things like this, but they use this wording, God knows my heart, knows I'm a good, overall a good moral person, that
Right.
even if I do all these things, and, it's like maybe everybody, offer a strange fire,
Mm-hmm.
what you said, it's not what I meant, it's not what I wanted, it's not what I said.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess my point was, in today's world, it might have been back then too, the feeling was, even though I'm doing these things, God knows that I'm pretty much a good guy, so
Mm-hmm.
therefore I'm getting kept in regardless.
Right.
That's the thinking, I think, that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we can convince ourselves, can't we? Solomon said there's no new thing under the sun, so that tells us people have always been that way. They've always tried to justify their actions by completely evil individual. They can, be a fairly decent person and still be lost, still be misled by tradition. And I think there's a lot of people, I hear that a lot. Well, so-and-so was a good person. Oh, sure, they drank a little bit and that. But they'd give the shirt off their back to their neighbor. They'd do anything. Well, that's all good and well. And that's a good start. But that's not enough to save anybody. We have to follow God's plan, God's way. And not the world's way. But that's just another one of those traps, those snares that Satan throws in our path to believe that kind of thing, that's all you have to do is just be a fairly good person.
Did God really say that, when we was out in the desert and being tempted and so on like that, and using things to make it seem like, hey, this is all right for you to do this as me, this is all right for you to eat off the fruit of the tree,
Yeah.
Of course, they did it.
Yeah. It's like Nadab and Abihu. How innocent is that to just go get some fires from a different place? Or was it Isaiah sticking his hand out to keep the ark from falling off the cart? It was an innocent move. And he was sincere in what he did, but that wasn't enough to keep God from putting him to death for doing what he did. Yeah, Dennis?
The only thing, the cart wasn't supposed to be used as transport.
Yeah. Yeah, despite what David did, made sure that the oxen had never been used before for anything. And the cart was freshly made, freshly built. But what did he violate? What was wrong with that? What did the old law say? Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. They had those staffs to put through the rings to carry it. They had a cut. But David wanted an open display. Look what I've got back. You know, I'm bringing the... So David was just as much wrong in what he did in that case. So what the Gentiles had done, God leaving them to themselves, they exchanged the truth of God for a lie, didn't they? 1 John chapter 1 verse 6 says that if we walk in darkness, we lie and do not follow the truth. 2 Thessalonians 2 verse 11 said the majority would rather believe a lie than believe the truth. Because they can't handle the truth. Right? John 8 verse 44 says the devil is the father of lies. So we know where lies, deceit, darkness, false doctrine all come from, don't we? Because we know it doesn't come from God. God cannot lie, Titus chapter 1 verse 2. Hebrews 6:18. And here, the lie that Paul speaks of here is idol worship. These Gentiles were worshiping the creation rather than the Creator. They were worshiping various gods named after planets, after stars, after animals. And while they worshiped these idols, Paul says they also served them. Is there a difference between worshiping and serving?
Serving implies going out and doing something on behalf of.
Right.
So for them to encourage others to worship those idols would be serving God.
Yeah. So serving has to do with kind of representing that idol and doing something you shouldn't be doing, while worship is an attitude of reverence, awe, respect, love. It involves following the prescribed ways of worshiping God as set out in his revelation. There are set ways in worshiping God under the Old Testament. There are set ways of worshiping God under the New Testament. And while it's true that worshiping is in a way serving God, serving God is in no way worshiping God. You have to be careful with that. We serve God when we assist the needs of our fellow man. We serve God when a man provides a living for his family. We're serving God. We serve God when we live faithfully in accordance to his will. But none of those things is worshiping God. These Gentiles that Paul speaks of are worshiping and serving their idols. They're paying reverence to these idols, respect, love toward them, while at the same time serving them, assisting their fellow man in the name of their idols, providing for their families and giving alms to their idols. God challenged Jeremiah to go out and see what the pagans are doing. See what how are these heathens treating their gods? And he said, they treat their false gods that are doing nothing for them, that have never done anything for them, as if they're the only only God in the world, in the universe. Here, did not speak. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. But God says to Jeremiah, but my people, Jews, who I have blessed over and over and over again, have chosen to leave me, the one true living God, to follow the gods of the Gentiles. Jeremiah chapter 1 and chapter 2. He said, false gods are nothing more than broken cisterns that hold no water. The majority of the religious world today and in centuries past have exchanged the saving truth for a lie as well. You know, as we said, there's nothing new under the sun. Every generation goes through the same thing. Which just brings home Matthew 7:23 and 20, Matthew 7:13, 14. The few and the majority. I mean, that applies not just the first century, to every generation. For centuries, men have rejected God by following the doctrines of men. I mean, we have today, one church as good as another. Faith alone saves. And God turned his back on the Gentiles because their hearts were set on doing their own thing. And he does the same today. What does the heart refer to? They set their hearts. The mind. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's the mind. It has nothing to do with our blood pump, does it? It's the part that it's part of us that thinks. Matthew 9, verse 4. It's the part of us that reasons. Mark 2, verse 8. That understands. Matthew 13, verse 15. It's the part of us that despises. 2 Samuel 6:16. That desires. Romans 10:1. That believes. Romans 10:10. That trusts. Proverbs 3:5. That determines. 1 Corinthians 7, verse 37. That purposes, Acts 11:23. That intends, Hebrews 4:12. That obeys, Romans 6:17. That condemns, 1 John 3, verse 20 and 21. And we could go on and on talking about what the heart does. Solomon says, as a man thinks in his heart, so is he. Proverbs 23:7. Brother Robert Whiteside said, when people are determined to reject God for their own way, God allows them unhindered to follow their chosen course so that they may the sooner see the degradation that comes to those who follow their own wisdom. The men and women of Noah's day had so rejected God that Moses said in Genesis 6, verse 5, every imagination and thought of their heart was what? Only evil continually, yeah. When we see in Matthew chapter 24, Jesus answering the third question of his disciples, when will the end come? He says, as in the days of Noah. We think things are getting bad, but we haven't come to the point where men only think of evil continually. I think when it gets to that point, then we can know the time is just about up. But when you have men and women, even in other parts of the world, who are still obeying the gospel, then God's not going to end anything. So vile had the men and women of Noah's day become, even those in Sodom and Gomorrah and the outlying towns, that they exchanged the natural use of the body for that which is unnatural, as Paul talks about here in verse 26 and 27. Paul refers to homosexuality as vile. In other places it's referred to as an abomination. And we have to keep in mind that Paul here is inspired by God. He's writing down how God feels about it, what he thinks of it. God says it's sin. It's transgression of his will to live that way. Galatians 5:16. 2 John 2:16. God created us, designed the desires of our body to be fulfilled in accordance to his will. Designed male and female to fit together naturally. Therefore, woman and woman, man and man is unnatural. I mean, all we have to do is look at the physical world, don't we? A nut and a bolt go together. Two nuts don't go together. Two bolts don't go together. A plug and an outlet. A bulb and a socket. Homosexuals argue irrationally that Paul here, his meaning for the use of the word unnatural, how would you guess they would use that? They would argue against that. Unnatural refers to individuals who are uncomfortable with homosexuality. But they say if a person is fine with it, if they support that lifestyle, then it's natural. You know, men will rationalize any type of depravity, thereby professing themselves to be wise in their own deceits. But to be unnatural, when we look at the Greek word, means to act against nature, to violate God's order of things, natural order of things, established laws. Men, leaving the natural use of the woman, burned in their lusts one toward another. And of course, that is mutual consent. One toward another is reciprocal lust. I mean, homosexuals can start their own churches, hire their own preachers, all they want, to give the appearance of spirituality and approval by God. But that doesn't prove anything any more than denominational churches prove.
Even created the Queen James Version of the Bible.
Is the Queen James? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep. Yeah, watched a little video of Charlie Kirk arguing with the female student at some university where she wanted him to prove that God is not a woman. Said, well, I don't know. Doesn't the pronoun he show? Yeah, but that's men who put that together. They chose to say he instead of she. How do you know? Where's your proof that men changed it from he to she, or she to he? What makes you think that God is a she, a female? But of course, she's not thinking about the inspiration of the scriptures either. God has given warning to mankind. If anyone remains unrepentant, they will not go to heaven. They have no hope of heaven. 1 Corinthians 6, verse 9 through 11. Paul said to the Corinthians, and such were some of you. Talking about liars, murderers, drunkards, gamblers, thieves. 1 Corinthians 6:11. Sexuals, liars, murderers. But they became saints. They became set apart from the world. Holy, righteous. Of course, we can't say righteous because there are those who believe that mankind cannot be righteous. Even though verse after verse says that we are. So God allowed these people to possess a reprobate mind, those in the first century, and he continues to do that. An attitude that enabled them to live any type of way that they wanted to live. I mean, it's the way it was in Sodom and Gomorrah, wasn't it? So there's nothing new. An attitude that allowed them to live without regard for human life. Murderers, without regard for others, slander, gossip, deceit, without regard for authority, parents, civil authority, divine authority. They became conceited, disrespectful, contemptible, did not keep their word. As parents, they didn't care about their children. As couples, they didn't care about their spouse. As children, they didn't care about their parents. Sounds a lot like the world today that we live in. Paul says that they which do such things are worthy of what? Death. Now, what kind of death is he talking about? Yep, separation from God. Isaiah 59, 1 and 2. And this, it can apply to both. It could apply to physical death as well, as in the case of Nadab and Abihu and Uzziah and others who lost their lives for violating God's in Sodom and Gomorrah. But so they suffered the punishment of physical death, but then they would be separated from God for all eternity as well. So there are many consequences that people don't to their sins. What's a consequence of homosexuality? Yeah. We'll say physically. Yep. Yep. What about murderers? Capital punishment. Drug users possibly die from an overdose. And I understand that fentanyl doesn't even require an overdose nowadays. Drunks can die of liver disease. Romans chapter 6 verse 23 says, the wages of sin is death. So basically God's saying their choice, they deserve what they get. These people love company. Love being around others who are just as depraved as they are. In 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 4, if you're not as depraved as they are, they'll speak evil of you because you don't follow in their footsteps. Any thoughts? Questions? Dennis?
Subject to the governing authorities in Romans chapter 13, verse 1,
Uh-huh.
speakers, and they're killing themselves or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so many sins affect more people than what people think too. You know, first of all, it affects God. It affects then the person. But it can affect friends, family members, and others as well. It's like Dallas Cowboy player, he's a rookie, 24 years old, got his first touchdown last week. Went home and shot himself that day. Yeah. Yeah, just last week, this past week, yeah. Mm-hmm. I mean, taking his life didn't just affect him, affect everybody that he knew, his family and his girlfriend, and so on. Yeah, nobody knows why. But you think he'd be happy, got his first professional touchdown. It's just sad, the choices that people make.